Thanks, Suzanne. I'm going to take a seat in a second, but Vivek, come on stage. You might as well come on stage now. And because he doesn't really need that much of an introduction. I mean, I've been given his bio, but I'm wondering where, how does that Superman suit feel good underneath? So, because according to this, you've saved world peace.
God.
But look, in all seriousness, previously, you were appointed as the first CIO under Obama for the United States government, credited for saving billions of taxpayer dollars, adopting, some of where you're heading now, some of those game-changing technologies, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this. And also strengthening the cybersecurity posture of the nation for launching open government movements. And that open government movement has continued, even since you've left the realms of the public service, and now in your exciting role within Salesforce. So I won't read out the rest of this because it is very long, but very impressive, I have to say. And I'm going to now take a seat with you. And just as I do that, I've hit the wrong button here, which is taking me away from my actual questions. But look, I do remember the opening question, and it is very much around, it's about customer and citizen engagement in a changing world. In your experience, what has been some of the biggest changes on a global stage of organisations basically embarking on this journey?
So I think, well, first, before I begin, I want to thank Suzanne and AIIA for having us here. And as I reflect on your question around the big changes, what I notice is that around the world, when you look at the population, there are about 7 billion people on the planet. You look at most countries, they're printing money. Except Australia, which did a great job navigating through the financial crisis. And there's this huge shift where technology for the first time is becoming a political issue. If you go back even 5 years, you didn't really see things like NBN at the national stage, or healthcare.gov at the national stage, or what's happening, whether you're in Japan or in the European Union, around access to information, access to services. So you have these twin forces around technology and globalization that are having a massive impact on how countries operate, but also how companies compete on a global stage. And it all begins with some really, really simple truths, right? So number one is you see that for the first time you have this massive democratization in technology where the average teenager with their mobile device has more power today than 5 years ago than most heads of states did, and access that information. And when you reflect on that, you realize all of a sudden there's this third wave of computing around mobile, around cloud, around social. And that third wave of computing is transforming everything from how politicians get elected, but more importantly, in terms of on a day-to-day basis when it comes to public services, how citizens get services, right? And their expectations are much greater than they ever have been. And on the private sector especially, what you're seeing is companies face only two choices, right? Either they innovate and they welcome their customers to the future, or they become extinct. And so those forces are making sure that each of us, whether we're in our capacity as a citizen or as a customer, are forcing a lot of changes around these institutions to fundamentally change the way they provide these services, how they serve IT, how they procure IT. And those are some of the most fascinating things that are happening.
I want to pick up on that, the innovation thing, and because I think for many organisations, I don't know, innovation is a really scary word because many organisations, they don't know what innovation actually means and how does it get embedded, how does that culture get embedded into their organisation. So innovation as a concept. Can you just elaborate on, in your experience, how have organisations truly innovated and use innovated versus an evolutionary thing?
Sure. So I think the mistake most people make is they think they can create a department of innovation, and somehow this department of innovation is going to transform how their whole organization works. I'll give you a very specific example. Today, I went and I visited this morning the New South Wales Service Center. And to me, that is innovation in action, right? So it didn't just start with some random strategy, but it was followed up with really strong execution. So you walk into the service center, and you could get your birth certificate, your driver's license, you could get your healthcare card, right? All in one place. You've abstracted the entire government at the local level, at the state level. And you really look at it, and a lot of people say, wow, how cool is the technology? Well, that's one part of it. So as I walked in, I met this woman named Ruby, and what was really interesting, I started asking her, so tell me about the service center, what's different, what are you guys doing that's so innovative? And she kind of walked through not just the services that they're providing today, but she had a view of 200 other services they were going to add. And the fact that recruiting, when they recruited people there, they made sure that they're bringing them from the hospitality industry, from the financial services industry. So what an amazing case study where people looked at the citizen experience and transformed it from the lens of the citizen rather than the government, right? Because if you looked at it from the lens of the government, you would be engaged in these parochial battles around Department X, Y, and Z, who has the budget, instead of saying, how do I design and optimize this experience from the citizen's lens? And that's true also in the commercial world, right? Which is the companies that are doing really, really well. The only differentiation you have today when you're talking global scale is not a monopoly, but it's a killer experience.
Agreed. I love that example. Thank you very much for that. Now, there's been a lot of talk, and even we've put out predictions around CMOs having now command of a bigger part of an IT budget. They're much more in control of an IT budget. Now, what does that then mean for, you were a CIO, there's a few CIOs in the audience here. What does that mean for CIOs, and what are some of those organisational changes that are going to take place as a result of this?
The deeper question, I think, is, well, why is that? Why is the bigger part of the budget moving to CMOs instead of CIOs? And I think the reason is, if you look at the last 4 decades when it comes to IT, majority of that spending has gone to the back office, right? You can go back to the 60s and massive investments in mainframes and mini computers and SNA networks. And then you had the rise of client-server computing, and so everybody invested very, very heavily on optimizing their supply chains, their ERP systems. And today, for the first time, you're seeing a shift in power where you have people that have access to, whether it's Twitter or Facebook, they're broadcasting their grievances, they're talking about positive experience that they're having. And CEOs are realizing that in order to build an enduring, lasting customer relationship, they have to connect with their customers on a real-time basis. And they have to be able to provide information in context when it matters. So when I land in Sydney and I have a mobile app, whether it's with Westpac or any other organization here, that context is really important in terms of the services that I'm looking for. When you're walking down the street and the police department knows there's an ongoing homicide or danger, why don't they let me know before I make that left turn, walk away, turn around, right? So there are a lot of disconnected systems and organizations. And what it means for CIOs, though, is all of a sudden is that they need to get away from thinking about themselves as just sort of information officers and really move into this world where they're talking about how do they fundamentally reinvent their business? Yep. How do they fundamentally recreate that customer experience? And I think it's very exciting because what you're seeing is billions of dollars of capital moving away from what used to be just back office technology to the front office now, because that's where most people are interacting with your brand if you're in the private sector, or with your government if you're in the public sector.
Agreed. And by the way, Ian's probably very happy now that he knows that you bank with Westpac. We've also seen, in conjunction with the power going across to the CMO, all of these new roles start to pop up. Chief Digital Officer, Chief Data Officer. What's your view on some of these new roles that are starting to pop up out there in the marketplace?
So you have to be a little careful with the roles as being a solution to fads, where people will hear about an area, right? Because you're not going to just solve it with a title, because titles alone are meaningless. I think it comes down to what are you really doing to put your customers at the heart of your operations? What are you doing as you're looking at your competition in terms of where is your competition investing, where are they innovating? And then how do you organize, right? A big part of this is, kind of classical organizational theory where people think by moving around boxes, somehow you're going to become more innovative or you're going to end up solving structural problems. I think it comes down to making sure that you're guided by your customers and what they're doing, right? So you could have a chief digital officer, there's nothing wrong with that, but it comes down to, are you just creating a single role, or are you actually backing that up with a shift in how you invest, right? Where are you spending the money? What are you doing in terms of your core strategy? I think if the role is aligned with budget and it's aligned with a fundamental shift in strategy, that's great. But if it's just a role without the juice to actually drive change, I think it's more of checking the box than anything else.
I'm going to ask a real tactical one, because I was asked this the other day myself. Should a CDO, Chief Data Officer, not digital, should a CDO be in the IT organization or in the business?
I think it depends what organization you're part of, right? But I think as we look forward in terms of there are a lot of businesses that are extremely data intensive, or their core is around data. And there are others who would say, well, they're not really data intensive, but the world we live in today, you've got to be able to slice, dice, cube the data to provide real-time insights, right? Not just here are KPIs and how are you doing, but what does that data really mean, right? So I think we live in a world where the entire planet is being instrumented. I could tell you on a real-time basis, whether you're in Beijing or Tokyo or London or Delhi or Sydney or Melbourne, right? What the mood of the cities are, what people think about the temperature. There's sensors that are, instrumenting and measuring the entire grid and the infrastructure. But what insight does that really give you? So I think it's less of which part do they report to. I think it goes back to my original answer around what are you transforming? How are you driving that change? But I think it's very important for the CEO, for example, to have his or her pulse on what's happening with the customers that you serve. And the data is meaningful, but I think what's really important is the insights you're getting and how you respond to those insights.
You've given a great example just before of your visit since you've been here. But is there any other evidence from your global experience around different industries, how they've adopted best practices around customer centricity? So we've heard from one example, but maybe some that which is a government department. What other industries are you seeing out there that are really transforming and adopting some of those best practices?
So I think there are so many examples, but maybe I'll zero in on two. So one in the private sector, I would point to General Electric. What they're doing is some really, really interesting stuff around the Internet of Things and the industrial internet, as they put it, where they're saying, well, what if a jet engine could talk? What would a jet engine say? And how do we build a community around a jet engine? So if you have an airliner an airline company that's actually servicing a jet engine. What if you could build a social community and the jet engine is transmitting, here's my temperature, here's the last tune-up I had, here's what's going on at this altitude. And at the same time, you have engineers collaborating in terms of the airline company and then also with GE, where all of a sudden you've built an entire community that's servicing that jet engine. And you get sort of this human-machine interface that's really, really interesting and represents sort of the future of service where machines are going to be talking to us. Whether you're looking at your mobile devices today, or whether you look at street lights talking and saying when they need to be serviced, so you never have a moment where a light is out. So some really amazing stuff that's out there. And then in Japan, some really cool stuff with an organization called METI. What they've done is they've created a platform where they're bringing together women entrepreneurs and building a community to connect them to CEOs and to connect them to venture capitalists and banks to really drive up entrepreneurship when it comes to women in Japan. Or even if you look at Japan Post, some really cool stuff happening in terms of analytics and BI on how they're slicing and dicing and making that data available real time. So you know what the experience of somebody who walks into Japan Post is, and actually optimizing their supply chains, but doing it in a very social way.
Yeah, look, the postal service is going through a massive change here in Australia as well. So, and that was a continuing theme. There were some discussions even, last week around at the conference that we were at last week around Australia Post. So, it is a continuing theme, and the Internet of Things is also, I think, a continuing theme. And it's a heads up for the panelists that are coming up. I've got a smart machines question for you coming up. So just prepare yourself. And Ian, John's looking at me thinking, smart machines? Not too sure. Anyway, now, is there, once again, drawing on your experience both here and globally, is there a trend that's happening that you would suggest or you would recommend, Australian businesses should really be taking into account? What's the one thing that Australian businesses should really be doing moving forward?
So it will be instructive to kind of look at what's happening around the world. I talked about this third wave of computing, right, when we talk about social, mobile, and cloud. And you look at some of the iconic brands that are part of history now, because they didn't see these forces come and how fast these forces are, right? So you look at a company like Kodak, right, being wiped out because we used to have a physical camera and a physical phone that was separate, and you had a completely separate computer. Now with your, whether you're on an iPhone or an Android device, you've got your camera, you've got your phone, you've got a computer, right? That fundamentally changed what happened to Kodak, right? And they weren't prepared for that future. They're still working on film. You look at a company like Netflix, and it wiped out this company called Blockbuster, which was in the movie rental business. So across every industry, what you're seeing is the acceleration of these forces, right? Even with thermostats, a company like Nest is disrupting that space where it's allowing you to connect in an intelligent way to your home, where you can instrument your entire home, whether it's with a Philips Hue light bulb, or you can change the colors, or it's changing the temperature in your home. So I would say, look at this third wave and make sure that you're riding above it, right? Because the velocity at which it's coming to disrupt massive industries, right? So I've personally seen what it's done to the cab industry in San Francisco and in New York, where you now have a company called Uber, where you can just click on a button and a car shows up and picks you up. Taxi drivers are figuring out what does their future look like. And that's the power of the mobile computing in your hand. That is such a fundamental shift that most people, I think, are still approaching it as, okay, great, we'll get a mobile strategy, we'll get the social strategy, but you look at whether it's politicians who've been destroyed by social because they've been outwitted by their competitors, or whether you look at businesses that have been made irrelevant by mobile and cloud, it's a completely different world. And I think the companies that are doing really well and nations that are doing really well are actually figuring out how do we harness the power of these technologies instead of waiting for some time in the future.
And I think you said it very nicely it's the combination of those things. And it's, we've been calling, and some people have kind of looked at us blankly, the nexus of forces. And it's those combination of those things that you've been talking about, the social, mobile, cloud, and information or analytics. It's those combinations that are where organizations should be focusing on. So I think you succinctly said, so thank you very much for that. Look, we've got a couple of... my last question before we invite the other panellists on stage to, as Suzanne said, continue the conversation, and this really is just a conversation, and I will be opening it up to the floor as well, so if you do have questions for Vivek or any of the esteemed panellists that will be joining on stage in a minute, you will have that opportunity. But in your role within Salesforce, since you've joined Salesforce, obviously you were very instrumental with the US government around cloud adoption and driving a lot of the changes in it was actually just mental changes, I think, in a lot of them, but a lot of those changes. What are the differences that you're seeing around the cloud adoption globally versus Australia? Are we on track? Are we a bit slow? Are we ahead of the curve? Are we riding that wave? Just, what's your perception on, meeting the customers here around that driving of cloud adoption?
I think there are a set of countries that didn't really have an option given the financial crisis, right? So in some ways, what was fortunate for Australia, the conservative approach, which paid off really well when it comes to the financial system, is holding it back a little bit when it comes to aggressively pursuing this third wave of computing. And what we're seeing globally, for example, you look at the UK, and they've got a G-Cloud policy framework in place where they've brought in vendors and they've actually focused on creating a cloud-first policy, essentially. Same thing with the US, massive changes in Canada. You look at Japan, you see massive parts of the country moving in that direction. I think in Australia, what we're seeing, and that's why I'm so excited about some of the amazing work in New South Wales, is that there hadn't been up till now a single entity that had made a massive transformation, which we're seeing now. I think you're going to see now a lot of other entities follow very, very fast. But a big part of it was driven, frankly, by the fact that it wasn't in a position where it had to innovate, had to cut budgets in a very, very significant way, like in the US, like in other parts of Europe and Asia.